Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Welcome to the Harvard Ed Portal. I'm Miley Takahashi, and I'm glad that you could be with us tonight. And I think we have about 100 people, maybe more, online right now. So thank you for joining us too. This is being live streamed just as a heads up for everyone. For those who've never been here before, this is the Harvard Ed Portal. We exist to connect the Elson Brighton community with Harvard University. And when we have opportunities like a faculty lecture series, we invite the much broader community as because we have space for it, and we're glad to have you here. We offer free programs and events. We provide educational, cultural, and professional development opportunities here. From everything from mentoring, which is actually happening right now for some Alston Brighton youth with Harvard undergrads, it's happening in that next space over there, to scholarships and career resources. So many of those are open to the broader community, but our intent is to really create resources and opportunity in the Alston Brighton neighborhood. So this lecture series is one of our signature events that we've been doing since we opened in 2008. The purpose of this is to bring Harvard's academic experts into the community so you can find out more about what research is happening. We've had topics like your brain on drugs, the Ebola crisis, the role of microbes in food, you name it. And tonight, though, we're going to be hearing from Professor Erin Hecht. She's an expert in the canine brain and maybe also other brains too, like human and primates, I think. She is the director of the Canine Brains Project and is an assistant professor in human evolutionary biology here at Harvard. It is Brain Awareness Week right now, so you are participating in a national event. Let me introduce Dr. Hecht. She's a neuroscientist. I'm going to read this because some of these are lots of words here that I don't know. She studied at UC San Diego. She has a PhD in neuroscience from Emory University, and she will tell you more about what all of that means tonight. In addition to being an award-winning neuroscientist, she's also the associate editor of Brain Structure and Function, a scientific journal that publishes, here we go, neuroscience research in many species, including dogs. And her research focuses on neuroanatomical specializations in dogs, primates, and humans. Is that right? Okay, so she'll tell us what that means. So it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Erin Hecht up here. Have questions prepared. She's happy to answer them. And I will see you again at the end of this lecture.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here today. I love talking about dogs. I love dogs. Who here has a dog? Awesome. I have a dog too. She's amazing. She's a pill, but I love her. Okay, so I'm a neuroscientist by training. I spent my PhD years working with chimpanzees who are also super fun to work with. And I also did non-invasive work with chimps, basically the same type of work that my lab is now doing with dogs. We put them in MRI scanners the way that we do with dogs, same type of technology we use to study human brains. And then one day I was sitting on the couch with my dog, watching TV and eating food. And a TV show came on about dogs and behavior and genetics and evolution. And I thought, this is amazing. Why is there no neuroscience in this TV show? So the next day, I emailed some veterinarians in Georgia, which is where I was doing grad school. I asked for MRI scans from their facilities from dogs that had been referred for scans, but didn't have anything that was anatomically wrong with their brains. I also started kind of scouting around for access to other types of canine brains. And eventually, over the period of years, that turned into the research program that I have now. So I feel very fortunate to be here. I can't believe I get paid to do this. It's super fun. My lab has the Canine Brains Project. So we're basically trying to understand what makes canine behavior work the way that it does. So how are canine brains wired? How does that translate into behavior and emotion and cognition? So we do behavior tests. You can see our behavior testing room here. So we have a room that's outfitted with video cameras on all sides of the room. And then we put tape on the floor so that the experimenters can kind of go through the behavior tests in exactly the same way every time. We have a couple students who have been through the class. They're sitting in the room kind of nodding knowingly, like, yeah, we learned how to do that. So people from the community actually bring their dogs into the classroom, and the dogs from the community are the participants in this class. Has anybody here actually brought their dog in? Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for making that possible. That's one of the things that our lab does. We also do MRI scans, as I mentioned, so you can see some pictures of canine MRI here. And we do that with the help of veterinarians from the local community. So all of the vets that work in our lab also work in vet clinics in and around Boston. If you've seen the Netflix documentary Inside the Mind of the Dog, you've seen a little bit about our lab, as well as many other labs that also study canine brains and behavior. So you can watch that movie if you haven't yet. You can kind of get a glimpse into our lab. And you can also visit our website, which is caninebrains.org. We have a little less well-produced video of our own that shows how we do this. Okay, so today I was going to talk about how we study dog brains in a way that is non-invasive, doesn't hurt the dogs, the same way we study human brains. What do dog brains look like? So just sort of a general friendly introduction to dog brains. What has our lab been learning? And what are we doing right now? Okay, so first of all, how can we study dog brains? So the answer is the same way that we study human brains using MRI scans. We use an MRI scanner. So as you probably know, humans go in MRI scans. Has anybody here had an MRI scan? Yeah, me too. I've had quite a few. Anytime we have to like test out a new sequence, I'm often the guinea pig. So I'm like really used to this. So you can see some pictures here of a dog going into an MRI scan and what the dog's brain looks like in the scanner. So the MRI scanner has this sort of like helmet type of thing that fits over the head. That's the part that actually makes the image. And then we're able to collect that data. If you've ever seen like a TV show like House or something where like they're watching the scan and then like something's lighting up on the screen and then the doctor or the scientist is able to say something like, oh, that guy's like definitely a sociopath, his amygdala isn't lighting up or something like that. That's complete baloney. That doesn't happen. We actually have to like analyze it after the fact. Usually we have to do statistics and combine multiple data sets together in order to actually see a pattern. So usually the only time that you can tell that anything's actually wrong is, or that anything's like, usually the only time something really jumps out with you is if something's like grossly wrong on the scan. Question, yes. Yeah, are the dogs awake? No, they are not awake. So there are some labs that train dogs over a long period of time to go into a scanner willingly. We want to be able to scan the largest number of dogs that we can, and the widest variety of dogs, including dogs that might have emotional problems and may not ever reach the point where they feel comfortable going into a scanner. And many dogs, even the ones that go through that training, experience some anxiety when they're inside the scanner. Most people experience some anxiety inside a scanner. It's loud and it's like confined and you're like in this tight space and there's something around your head and you can't see because it's like it's around your eyes. So we give the dogs some nice drugs. Yeah. So we use propofol. So this is what's used like in tooth cleaning or to spay or neuter. So we actually use less drugs than in a spay or neuter or a tooth cleaning. All of our scans are supported by veterinary anesthesiologists. So these are the most highly trained veterinarians that are available. So if you were to take your dog for a tooth cleaning or a spay or neuter, you wouldn't have an anesthesiologist there. Most likely it would just be a veterinary technician. In our scans, nothing invasive is happening to a dog. They're not, they're not being opened up or anything like that, but we still have the highest possible level of care. We also have veterinary technicians, vet assistants, and continuous monitoring during our scans. So basically, we're treating the dog like it's getting heart surgery, even though it's just getting a 60-minute MRI scan. So what does a dog brain look like? So that is a dog brain. So this is this image here is a 3D rendering of a dog brain. So this is the front of the dog's head. This is going towards the neck. And then these images here are like cross-sectional views. So this is like a rendering, like if the cross-sectional view in this plane, this is a rendering in this plane, and then that is a rendering in this plane. So we're looking at 3 different cross-sectional planes of that 3-dimensional object. So this here is called the olfactory bulb. It's kind of oriented into the dog's nose, and it's responsible for picking up the odors that are in the dog's environment. And then let me see if I can see. And then over here is the brainstem. So this is kind of going down into the spinal column. So that carries the motor commands from the dog's brain into its body. So it generates the sense of movement. And then this is what's called the temporal lobe. And it processes hearing. And in dog brains, there's a center there that processes words and language. And human brains also have a center in that same part of the brain that processes language. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the talk. Okay, so here are some images in this cross-sectional plane from different breeds of dogs. And you can see just looking at this that different breeds have like slightly different anatomy in their brains. So for example, if you look at a dog that has a really small body and a small head, for example, like the Yorkie, you can see that the brain is kind of really taking up all of the available space in the skull, and it has a sort of more globular shape. On the other hand, if you look at like a golden retriever, the brain has a little bit more of a globular shape, and there's actually quite a bit of air. That's little air. So there's quite a bit of variation across different breeds of dogs, not just in the size of the brain, but also in the shape and anatomy of the brain. Here's a dog brain relative to a human brain. It's about 1/10 of the size of the human brain, or about the size of a large lemon. Yep, so yeah, about that size. And then the olfactory system in dogs is much more developed than it is in humans. So in dogs, the area in their nose that's kind of leading into that olfactory bulb, the part that brings odors into the brain, has this really convoluted honeycomb-like structure. So that exists so that the olfactory epithelium, the skin that has olfactory receptors embedded in it, can have a lot of surface area. So the surface area of this epithelium is about 30 square inches in dogs, and it's only about 1 square inch in humans. So that's part of why dogs have such a better sense of smell than humans do. So if we take a look at the olfactory bulb in dogs, it's really big, like it's just super easy to point out. It was easy for me to find when I pointed out to you a few slides ago. If we try to point out the olfactory bulb in humans, it's really hard to find. This is actually my brain scan. So this is my olfactory bulb. And you really have to squint. It's like this tiny little bright dot right here. And only one of them was actually visible in the MRI scan. So yeah, the olfactory system in dogs is just way more developed than it is in humans. So what have we been learning in our lab, dogs? So one thing is that historical functions like hunting, herding, and guarding have left their mark in the brain, even in dogs that aren't practicing these skills today. So as I'm sure everybody knows, different breeds of dogs historically were developed for these different functions. So for example, border collies historically were used to herd sheep. That is a modified form of predatory behavior. So border collies stalk sheep. They They move toward them in a way that looks a lot like the way that a predator would approach a sheep. They also do something called giving eye, which is like staring really intently at the sheep. So that makes the sheep nervous in an instinctive manner, and then the sheep instinctively move away. Meanwhile, there's another another group of shepherd breeds, livestock guardian breeds, that they're in the same environment. They're also with livestock animals, but they display a very different pattern of behavior. So their job is to be with the livestock and protect them. So if a predator were to try to approach the sheep, they should intervene and sort of thwart that predator attack. So they interact with the sheep like conspecifics. They protect them. They might even try to mate with them. And then meanwhile, we also have different breeds of dogs that are bred for things like hunting by scent versus hunting by sight. There are breeds that are specialized historically for guarding people or property, for providing companionship. So there's a lot of behavioral specialization that has been developed over the span of many, many generations. So if we want to look for that, one way to do it is just to take a bunch of dogs' brains from many different breeds and say, where is the variation? And then ask what accounts for that variation. So this figure illustrates where is the variation, the first part of that question. So these are 6 networks that mathematically account for the variation across a data set of 63 dog brains that I got from that very first attempt to get involved in canine neuroscience, where I started emailing veterinarians in Georgia who had MRI scans from dogs that didn't have neurological problems. So these networks involved brain regions that seem to line up for types of behavior and cognition that are probably important for the types of things that are relevant for dogs' lives. So this first network has regions that are involved in reward processing. So these are regions of the brain that kind of light up in MRI scans when individuals experience reward or learn something that is rewarding. The second network has regions of the brain that are involved in the sense of smell and taste. The third network has regions that are involved in moving the body, moving the eyes, and navigating through space. The fourth network has regions that light up in dog fMRI scans when dogs see or hear people or other dogs. So we think that these are regions that are involved in social processing. And then the fifth network has regions that are involved in the flight or fight response, so like stress and fear and anxiety. And then the sixth network has regions that are involved in the sense of smell and vision. So, okay, so now we know where the variation is across dogs. Question. Yeah, so this is just structural anatomy. So even though the dogs are sedated, brain structure doesn't change when you're sedated. So we're just looking at brain anatomy. From prior research. So even though we're not looking at brain activity in these scans, we know from prior research, for example, that this region here is involved in olfaction. So that's been verified by many prior studies. Any other questions at this moment? Okay, so we know where the variation is. So now we can ask what accounts for it. So then we could take all of the dogs in this data set, and we could ask, historically, does this dog come from a breed that was historically developed for companionship? Like this dog didn't have a job other than to be a companion for humans. Dogs that historically were used for protection or sledding or herding or vermin control, those would be terriers, police and military functions, retrievers, sight hunting, scent hunting, or sport fighting. And then we could ask how each of those historical functions is associated with each of those 6 networks. And there are some associations that seem to make some sense. So for example, the network that was involved in moving the body, moving the eyes, and spatial navigation was most strongly correlated both with dogs that historically were developed for sight hunting and for bird flushing and retrieving. So if your job is to watch something that's moving through the environment and then get your body to it and bring it back to a person, then those parts of the brain are probably pretty important for you. The breeds that were developed for scent hunting, their strongest association is with a network that involves higher order olfactory regions. So these are parts of the brain that are involved in conscious awareness of what odors you're detecting. Breeds that historically were used for sport fighting, sadly, their highest association was with that network of the brain that's involved in the fight or fight response. And then breeds that were historically developed for companionship, just being a social partner for humans, their highest association was with this network that's involved in social processing. So brain regions that in dog fMRI studies activate when dogs see or hear humans or other dogs.
Is this just the volume of tissue that's...
Yep. Yeah, so there are some other relationships here that may be more difficult to interpret. Also, this was an opportunistic data set, so we were just kind of taking the data that we could get from the veterinary MRI scanner. So we're hoping that with the data we're collecting now, we'll be able to disentangle all of this a little bit more. So another thing that we've learned is that dogs have evolved to learn more adeptly from their human teachers and seem to be evolving to devote less of their brains to flight or fight and fear processing. So dogs' brains have been changing through the course of domestication, and they seem to be evolving more towards learning and less towards fear and flight or fight processing. So in order to explain this, I want to take a step back and kind of explain where dogs came from. So dogs descended from a now extinct ancestor of gray wolves. So the wild ancestor of domestic dogs is no longer with us. The closest living relative of that wild ancestor is probably the gray wolf. So you could imagine the wild ancestor of domestic dogs looking something like a gray wolf. And what scientists think probably happened is that these wild wolf ancestors were living in the same environments as ancient humans, and they were kind of scrapping off of human waste, and individual wolves that were less afraid of humans and could make humans less afraid of them obtained fitness benefits in the form of more scrapped food. So if you could be less afraid of humans, make humans less afraid of you, you got more food, your babies survived more, you had more offspring, and then that kind of proceeded to lead over many generations to what we now know as domestic dogs. So there are those ancestors of those wolf-like commensals still exist. So commensals are animals that live around human environments, kind of the way that squirrels and raccoons do now. So 80% of the dogs on this planet do not live as pets in human households. They kind of live like squirrels and raccoons do, where they're just sort of around human settlements, living in villages and towns, not in a household. They may or may not have a name. They're probably not fed per se, but they are living off of human food. So they're known as village dogs. Village dogs are the originators of all of the breeds of domestic dogs that we have now. So in one of the studies that we've recently run, which is still enrolling dogs now, we compared MRI scans from village dogs to modern breed dogs like golden retrievers, Labrador retrievers, border collies, German shepherds, and so forth. So here's what we found. These pre-modern dogs and village dogs showed increased volume in the amygdala, which is a center in the brain that is involved in flight or fight processing. It's also involved in fear and aggression, which are sort of components of flight or fight processing. On the other hand, modern dogs show increases in cortex, which is this wrinkly outer covering of the brain, Cortex supports learning and behavioral flexibility. So what we think is happening here is that as dogs sort of become more accustomed to living in human environments, become more and more intertwined with humans, they have less of a need for that flight or fight processing. That's getting tamped down, but they have more of a need for learning. So that's getting sort of amplified. And we actually saw that across individual dogs, the amount of expansion in the amygdala, that part of the brain that's involved in flight or fight processing, predicted the fear score of individual dogs. And the amount of expansion in their cortex, the part of the brain that's involved in learning and behavioral flexibility, that predicted the trainability score of individual dogs. So this, in particular, might have relevance for working dogs and service dogs. Okay, so another thing that we've learned is that when dogs learn to do a job, we can see evidence of this in their brains. So we scanned Labrador retrievers that were trained for scent detection, service work, or traditional hunting roles. And we see these widespread differences across many different regions of the brain. So these are all the same breed of dog. They're all Labrador retrievers. So all of the differences that I've shown you so far in previous slides, those are like looking at differences across different breeds, but these are all the same breed. So what we're seeing here is differences that are related to the job that the dog is doing. So this is really hot off the press. There are a collection of different people in the lab that are working on this right now, and we're expecting to learn a lot more in the coming weeks and months. Was there a question? Yeah, so scent detection and hunting dogs are from the same lines. The service dogs are from a different line. Yeah, that's a good question. We also have service dogs that are that washed out of the program that are just companion controls, and we see differences there as well. And then another, the final finding that I was going to tell you about is that dogs have a pathway in their brains for understanding human language. And surprisingly, it looks an awful lot like the human pathway that we have in our own brains for understanding language. So who here talks to their dogs? Yeah, I totally talk to my dog. Does anybody have a voice for their dog? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I have a running monologue for Izzy, like when she's doing things, like I'm like saying what she's like thinking and saying like as she's going around and doing her stuff. So when people come into the lab, we ask them to fill out several surveys about their dog's behavior at home. And one of the surveys asks people how many words they think their dog knows. So how many people think your dog knows more than 5 words? More than 10? More than 20? More than 30? Awesome. Yeah. So estimates vary on how many words that dogs know. 30 to 60 is sort of a general rough estimate. I don't feel like Izzy knows that many, but maybe Izzy's not too bright. Some extremely stellar word learning dogs have learned like up to 300 words. Yeah. So the people that participated in our study filled out this survey, let us know how many words their dog knew, including other words that may not have been on the list. And I will say over half of the dogs that have participated in our research have been working dogs or service dogs. So most of the words that those dogs know are highly trained words. And so people have good reason to be confident that their dog knows the word. So in the human brain, we have this pathway called the arcuate fasciculus. It supports communication, both spoken communication and gestural communication, including sign language. It's really robust, it's big, so you can see it here, and it's bigger on the left side of your brain. You've probably heard this saying that like language is on the left side of your brain. That's not entirely true. Language is actually on both sides of your brain, but there is a little shred of truth to it. Some aspects of language are more represented on the left side of your brain, and this pathway is bigger on the left side of the brain in humans. chimpanzees are some of our closest living primate relatives. They also have an arcuate fasciculus. It also supports vocal and gestural communication. Chimpanzees have vocal communication like humans do, although they don't have words, obviously. They do have a pretty complex system of gestural communication. They have like over 30 different hand gestures that they use to communicate with each other. It is, as you can see, it's much weaker and smaller than it is in humans. It's also not bigger on one side of the brain or the other. Dogs are obviously not as closely genetically related to us as chimps. On the other hand, they are embedded in our communities. They live in human households. They grow up listening to human language all the time. We talk to them. We may give them voices like I do for Izzy. So there was a student in my lab who asked a really good question in this dog class that I teach every year. She wondered whether dogs might have a pathway like this and whether it might be related to their ability to understand human language. So we thought, well, we have this survey that we've given to all of the people that come into the lab and get their dog's brain scanned. And then we can measure this part of the dog's brain and we can see if they have the pathway. So we did that. So here's the pathway. It does indeed exist. So we were able to, we knew where the pathway should be because previous research had identified parts of the dog's brain that are active when the dog vocalizes and parts of the brain that are active when the dog hears other vocalizations that it understands, including human words that it understands. So that's sort of the analog of the endpoints of the human pathway. So we looked at the connections between those regions of the brain and the dog, and we found this really nice, robust pathway. It's bigger on the left side of the brain. So that graph in the middle that shows the asymmetry quotient, the fact that it is negative means that it's bigger on the left side. So it's bigger on the left like a human, and unlike a chimp, which is genetically closer to a human than a dog. And also across individual dogs, both the red component and the blue component of this pathway, so both parts of this pathway, predict the number of words that individual dogs know. So it seems like it has a very similar function to the arcuate fasciculus in humans, which is surprising because humans are more closely related to rodents than we are to dogs. So you can see dogs here, and then humans are here. So we're on this same sort of like mini branch of the tree with rodents. The dogs are here. And then if we follow the dog branch back, our divergence point, leading to like the closest point between dogs and humans was 95 million years ago. So the ancestral mammals 95 million years ago had really small, simple brains that almost certainly did not have this pathway. So this pathway probably arose independently in both dogs and humans. So it's probably coevolution in a human environment that allowed this to arise in dogs, which I think is pretty cool. So to summarize, so far, we've learned that dogs' brains are wired to understand us, to understand human language, and to learn from us. So they're evolving to be able to learn better from humans, to be able to absorb what we're trying to teach them. Over the centuries, we have shaped dogs' brains for different specialized functions like hunting and herding and guarding, and now we're reshaping them yet again for new functions that can support health and accessibility and societal well-being, things like service work, guide dog work, detection work. And we can use the same methods to study brains in dogs as we do in humans. So almost any question that we could study in human brains, we could also probably study in dogs. So just a little bit about what we're doing now. So every fall, I teach a course about dogs, which don't tell my other class, but this is my favorite class every year. There's an article about it in the Gazette, which you can read. So I teach a Harvard College class. There's also an extension course that is open to anybody who wants to enroll. So the course allows people to interact with dogs, to learn to measure dog behavior, to understand dog behavior better, understand how dogs evolved. And this class and much of the research in the lab is funded by a grant from the National Science Foundation. The idea is that we have this classroom to lab pipeline where students learn about dogs and the evolution of behavior and the study of behavior in the class. And then that sort of creates a natural bridge point from the classroom into research in the lab. And then we want to be integrated with the community. So we do a lot of outreach events like what we're doing now. We also do things like festivals and different outreach events. We go to different sorts of dog events, like working dog events. Yeah. So next I'm going to tell you about a few studies that we have going on that are actively enrolling participants. So we have a dog life experience study, which is led by Dr. Julia Espinoza. So we're looking at how early life experiences affect dogs' behavior and brain organization. So much like in humans, stressful experiences early in life can have lasting influences on emotional behavior in dogs, often producing difficulty with fear and aggression and reactivity. So we're looking for genetic factors for risk and resilience. Human research has identified some genetic factors for resilience. So some individuals seem to be resilient to early life stress. So we're hoping that we might be able to identify something like that in dogs, which may be useful for treatment. So we're doing MRI scans and genetic tests. Dogs can participate through owner surveys, genetic tests, and/or MRI scans. So this is open to dogs with and without a history of adversity and/or current reactivity issues. We have the child-dog bonding study led by Dr. Olivia Riley. So this is looking at how social bonds develop between kids and dogs and how those bonds buffer stress, both in the kid and the dog. We're also trying to study whether the strength of the bond predicts the magnitude of the stress buffering effect. And we actually scanned both the kid and the dog. The kid has to be age 8 to 12. And the dog can be any breed, but kid has to be age 12. We have our pre-modern dog study, which is a glimpse at what the brains of the earliest dogs might have been like. This is led by Sophie Barton, who is a grad student in the lab. Open to village dogs, New Guinea singing dogs, dingos, and other types of ancient and pre-modern dogs. And then we have our pre-modern or our working breed study, also led by Sophie Barton. In this study, we're looking at how dogs' brains support their jobs and how brains are different across different breeds of dogs that have different types of behavioral specializations. And a big goal here is to identify predictors of working skill to see if we can help people that are trying to develop better working dogs for these roles understand what makes a dog good at its job. So right now we're enrolling labs, border collies, German shepherds, and Eurohounds. That includes both working dogs and non-working dogs from those breeds. So we're also looking specifically at service dogs from some of these breeds. So we're working with a few different service dog organizations. So one of them is America's Vet Dogs. They have Labrador retrievers that they train as service dogs to assist veterans who have mobility issues. We're also working with Fidelco. They have German shepherds who are guide dogs. And then we have, there should be one more there. Okay, and then we're also working with the Penn Vet Working Dog Center. Maybe somebody's not a fan of German shepherds. So the Penn Vet Working Dog Center produces dogs that detect medically relevant odors. So they make COVID detection dogs. They can also detect cancer and other types of medically relevant odors. And they also can search for survivors after a disaster. So All of these working dog organizations are producing dogs that help people. So we're trying to help these organizations help dogs help people by identifying features in the brain that help these dogs do their jobs better. And so far, we have already found a few biomarkers. I mentioned a few earlier. I feel pretty confident that we'll be able to do this. Similar studies in humans have found similar types of biomarkers. So I think that we'll be able to do this in dogs as well. And we're always looking for new organizations to partner with. The hardest part of this research really is just finding the dogs. If anybody has connections or is interested in enrolling themselves or connecting me or members of our lab with somebody else, I am very, very happy to be connected. So if you want to learn more or you're interested in enrolling, you don't have to do an MRI scan. You could just fill out a survey. You could do a genetic sample. You can visit our website and learn more. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer questions.
If you were shown a 3D model of some random brain, dog brain, could you actually say, oh, this dog has exceptional language learning ability and is a really good chaser or something like that?
Unfortunately, no. So if you're just given an MRI scan of a brain, the only way that you would be able to say anything specific about that individual dog is if something is wrong. In order to identify patterns like this pattern is associated with this dog has exceptional word recognition ability or something like that. You would need a large number of dogs with exceptional word recognition ability, and then be able to compare them to a large number of dogs that don't have that ability. But maybe someday it will get there.
Thanks for your presentation. I thought it was great. So I was surprised when that 80% of worldwide dogs, if I were village dogs or kind of doing their own thing, and 20% would be domesticated. And then I was thinking, okay, so the 20 worldwide, only 20% of dogs are really around people all the time and being talked to and those kinds of things. And the working dogs, and a lot of us who have either dogs that are a certain breed or mutts that we did that DNA thing to see what breeds they had. My guess is I think a lot of working dogs aren't really doing the function that they were bred for. So you might have a lab, but you're not taking him duck hunting. You just like him because he's really friendly, right? So dogs that were trained to do this skill maybe aren't doing it as more. And the dogs that are around humans are, at least maybe, not reproducing as much because they're being spayed and neutered. And so I don't really know. Are there any thoughts on that and how that might change where these brains are going?
So one way to think of this is an evolutionary mismatch. So you might think that, for example, border collies are super well adapted to be outside chasing sheep around all day. And then you put them in an apartment and they're bored and alone. And then you might get a situation where one day the door is open and they see a car going down the street and they have a really strong urge to just chase that thing. And that can happen. And it turns out that border collies have a higher incidence of chasing than other breeds of dogs, which can lead to things like getting hit by cars. That could be framed as an evolutionary mismatch. So there are still some vestiges of selection for behavior, ancestral behaviors that are still present today. Even that being said, selection for ancestral behaviors has been diminishing in recent times. So border collies now that are just being bred as pets, they're not under selection for herding sheep anymore. So those ancestral behaviors are probably not being sort of maintained in the brain, in the genome, in the way that they were hundreds of years ago in Scotland. So they're probably sort of dying down. Question in the back? Are there collaborations? Yeah, so far the village dogs that we have scanned have been dogs that were rescued and brought to the US. Village dogs in places in the world where there are village dogs, if they need medical care, often the only way that they're going to get medical care is if they're rescued and brought to a place in the world that has medical care. So we end up scanning those dogs that have come to the US that way. We don't currently have any collaborations with people that are studying village dogs in situ. But there are labs, like there is an amazing lab in India that is studying village dogs just as they exist, without, bringing them into laboratories, just going out into villages, studying their behavior. They're doing really amazing research. Uh-huh.
Two questions. One relating to village dogs. I've heard of coy dogs. Are those considered dogs? And the second question is, you referred to the neurological pathway for human words and communication dogs have. Is that the same pathway they use when they listen to communication from other dogs and so on?
Yeah, so I would imagine that this pathway is also probably used when dogs are communicating with each other. There are also other pathways in the brain that are used in communication. Not all of them involve cortex. So cortex is this wrinkly outer covering of the brain that is very loosely speaking involved in higher cognition. There are also other parts of the brain that are involved in sort of more automatic processing that can happen more quickly and is more instinctual. So those may involve the midbrain or brainstem. So some parts of dog communication probably happen on that level. Some parts of human communication also happen on that level. Yeah, so I would guess that probably both of those things are happening in dog brains. As far as I know, nobody has really studied that. It is a difficult thing to study in a naturalistic way. Because when you put a dog in an fMRI scanner, so if you have an awake dog in an fMRI scanner, the dog's in a really unnatural kind of context. It's like squeezed into this tube, its head is in this helmet type of thing. It's actively inhibiting the desire to get out of there. And then it's watching something on a screen. It's got cotton stuffed into its ears. It's looking at a two-dimensional movie that's usually pretty low resolution. It's just not like it's not like anything like actually interacting with a real dog in the real world. And I'm not currently aware of any studies that have looked at what does dog brain activity look like when dogs are hearing other dogs communicate with each other in a naturalistic way. But that's an interesting question. Thank you. Uh-huh.
I was thinking about how like 90% or maybe even more of what you see on social media is fake, but I see a lot of like things dogs do that are wildly impressive. And I was like, I see some do algebra and math, and I'm like, no way, that's real. And you also see dogs like riding skateboards and surfing. I was wondering how much of that is due to like their breed or, their owner's training, and also like how much of that is real and how much can they actually do?
Skateboards, totally. Algebra, no. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question about, I guess, the relationship between, modern advances in AI and the dog's brain studies. I mean, historically, neural networks in AI have been very small compared to the human brains, that you probably can't infer a lot of, relationship value. But with recent advances in, convolutional neural networks used in large language models, that scale has gone up to, hundreds of billions of parameters. And your studies have brought, the human brain down to kind of the dog level. And are they getting close enough that those fields can learn from each other?
Yeah. So there are two things that my lab is doing right now with machine learning. So one of them is looking at connectivity in the brain. So we can look at with the data that we collect, we can look at how every point in the brain is connected with every other point. So in the scans that we're collecting right now, we have about 1 million points in the brain. So that's about 1 million times 1 million. So if you imagine that, like we've done about 160 dog scans so far. So if you imagine that 160 times 1 million times 1 million, that is a data set that is like I've tried, it crashed the cluster at Harvard. So that's not tenable using traditional analytic approaches. So we are looking at support vector machine approaches to sort of try to figure out how to approach looking at group differences in that like really massive data set. Another thing that we have a really bright student looking at is looking at machine learning to decode vocalizations. And so that work is not specifically focused on dogs, but I'm hoping that we might be able to apply it to dogs.
So you said that dogs were pretty or more similar to humans in their word learning capabilities than chimps were, and that surprised me. And I was just wondering, what animal or species or something like that is at the pinnacle of that and is much better at learning words, if you know.
So I guess I wouldn't want to say that like dogs are better at learning words than chimps. So there have been a few attempts to engage in language learning with chimps and other great apes. Like you may have heard about Coco the gorilla, who learned some aspects of American Sign Language. So that's really impressive. There's also Kanzi the bonobo, who uses a lexigram, which is like a big board that has a bunch of symbols on it that Kanzi can point to these different symbols, and the symbols represent words. So great apes can totally learn words and use them. But it's just that their brains don't seem wired, or dog brains seem to have some aspects of similarities that aren't present in ape brains. So what species are the best word learners? That is a really good question. I think it depends on how you set the bar. I think in like historically, scientists have gotten themselves tied up in like trying to figure out which animal is the best at X, Y, or Z. And I feel like that's kind of a fool's errand. Maybe it's better to try to understand what makes each species the way that they are and why are they different, and just try to understand each animal for itself, rather than trying to like hold up a measuring stick.
So I know you guys were looking into how early experiences have shaped their brains. Have you guys looked into the differences in training? So whether it's positive only training, if it's what people call balanced training, or if people use, for example, like prong collars or e-collars, and how that changes their brain? Yeah,
we are collecting that data on the survey. We have not yet looked at it. I think that's an excellent question. So far, who's leading that study has found that early life stress, completely unsurprisingly, produces an increase in fear and aggression. So I think that is exactly what everybody would expect. And so our next step is to look at how does that affect the brain, and can we find any genetic features that confer resilience.
Thank you.
Hi. So I was just curious, like, so with your current research, like, how can it actually be translated to when you're like regularly communicating with your dog? So like, how can your research results how can they really be translated? That is my first question.
So how can these research results be translated to when we're communicating with our dogs? Maybe one way is, I think these results indicate that dogs are wired to learn from us. So they can absolutely learn. And if it seems like they're not learning, maybe we could try reframing our approach, and like trying a different way to teach them. Yeah, I think also listening to dogs and sort of observing where the dog is at and how they're responding can also help us to communicate with them a little bit better. I think dogs are actually pretty good at communicating with us. So if we can like maybe learn a little bit about reading their body language, their facial expressions, and their vocalizations, that can help us to communicate with them better.
Okay. And my next question is, can your research be applied in like developing drugs or like medicines for dogs?
I'm hoping that our research on early life stress and fear and aggression might potentially go in that direction. So one of the questions we have is whether there may be subtypes of aggression, maybe potentially one type of aggression that is more reward-based and another type of aggression that is more fear-based. That is the case in other animals. And it seems like it would make sense from an evolutionary standpoint. Aggression that is about avoiding a threat or defending yourself kind of has a different adaptive function than aggression that is about obtaining a benefit or a reward. So I wonder if we're able to actually find different circuits in the brain that support those different types of aggression, if that might lead to different drug targets that could treat dogs that have those different types of aggression. I'm not a veterinarian myself, so I think developing those types of medications would be up to veterinarians, but I'd be very happy to contribute to that effort.
Yes. How does a family dog assign the role of alpha, and how do they distinguish between different bonds between family?
So how does a family dog understand the concept of alpha and pick that up across family members? So this idea of alpha is actually kind of persisted in like the popular culture for a few decades now. And the person who came up with it has retracted it and like it seems like he really regrets putting it out there. So research in wolves and also most primate species is now indicating that dogs is a little bit more flexible than researchers originally conceived it. So it seems like there may not necessarily be a steep dominance hierarchy where there's like one, alpha at the top of the totem pole and then others kind of like in a rigid hierarchy under that. But rather there may be sort of a flexible thing where some individuals have expertise in particular contexts, and the group knows which individuals should be trusted and followed in particular contexts. So dogs may know which individuals in the household are likely to provide resources or make decisions. So that might be what we perceive as alpha, or what we think dogs see as alpha. Like, this is the person who gives me my food. This is the person who decides when it's time to go on a walk. Or this is the person who decides when it's bedtime. So it's maybe more of a flexible context dependent thing.
Done any functional MRIs on non-neutered dogs and compared activity?
Any functional MRIs on, sorry?
Non-neutered dogs?
Yes. So we actually have a study, like the students just showed me the results like yesterday. So we did not specifically set out to compare neutered to non-neutered dogs, but we knew like in the course of collecting all this other data that some of them were going to be neutered versus not, or spayed versus not. So we thought, well, we can examine this post hoc. So this is like super preliminary. Please don't put too much weight on all of this. But so far, we don't see significant differences between intact male and female brains, although we are only scanning females that are not in heat. So that might change if the females were in heat. However, we are seeing significant differences between neutered and intact males. We haven't yet run spayed and intact females. So this might suggest that the differences between intact and castrated dogs are bigger than the differences between intact males and females. Giant grain of salt, super preliminary results are like 2 days old. We will keep looking into that.
What kind of numbers is your research based on? Is it tens or hundreds or thousands?
Yeah, so far we have scanned so I made a note of the 150th dog, and I think we've scanned about 9 or 10 since then. So over 150, maybe close to 160. We're scanning 4 more tomorrow.
Hello. Would you ever consider looking at the behavioral effects that dogs give to individuals with autism?
Yeah, I would love to. Yep. So our child-dog bonding study is looking at neurotypical child-dog bonds. And we wanted to do that as sort of like an initial first study as a jumping off point for looking at therapeutic effects in other kids.
Yeah. For your early life study, are you looking at
dogs that were raised with things like puppy culture and ENS and things like that, or just negative effects?
Both. Yeah. So we need the dogs that had perfect happy puppyhoods, and we also need the dogs that had traumatic puppyhoods in order to compare.
Can dogs be bilingual?
Totally. Yeah, dogs can be bilingual.
Yeah.
Yeah, some working dog training programs intentionally train dogs on commands in another language.
Really enjoying your talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
So are there any studies being done by other labs where they're actually reporting from different brain regions while dogs are behaving?
So there are a few different ways to record from the dog brain while dogs are behaving. Many years ago, like 100 years ago, the way that people did this was with invasively implanting electrodes in dogs' brains. Thankfully, people aren't doing that now. There are attempts to use EEG and another technology called FNIRS, functional near infrared spectroscopy. So both of those techniques involve wearing a cap, and then the dog can kind of like roam around and behave in the world. The data is not great. So both of those techniques work pretty well in humans. Dog skulls are pretty thick. And if you remember the slide that I showed that had the golden retriever with a large amount of air, most dog brains actually have a lot of air around them. It's called the frontal sinus, and it helps to keep the air running a lot. So that air is adaptive, and actually in really tiny brains that are squished into the skull and don't have any air around them, that's actually not good. So that air produces a problem for getting signal from the brain from these EEG or FNIRS caps. So the signal is not great, but there are some attempts to use EEG and FNIRS for kind of like freely behaving experiments in dogs. So we're kind of still waiting for like a really good methodology to allow us to do this. Maybe it'll come around. Technology is changing quickly.
Yeah, I guess, but something like, could you, is it considered okay these days to do any kind of invasive recording, like putting a net inside, laying it on an area of the brain, and then having the dog, heal up and
go on its way?
On its merry way.
Yeah, I saw a paper in China that did something like that in beagles. I think I personally wouldn't want to do it, just because that's pretty invasive. Yeah, I think that it is approvable. I think that there are labs that it could be done. Yeah, I think it just would be whether an individual researcher wanted to do it. Thank you. Thank you all very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.